the first batch of changes is here, and as they announced the first time, it's all about the Fairness Ascension monsters. So let me share my opinion on these changes, and please feel free to share yours as well, since it seems like they do want to hear the players' opinions in these Rebalance changes. Now, the first point to touch is the frequency they have planned for the changes. They are announcing big weekly patches, and since we know they are planning to end at the end of May, we can assume that at a minimum, we will be getting 5 more patches, with an extra one coming next week, which also covers these Fairness Ascension spawns. Honestly, I wish they would just do this constantly. I think the game could use patches at least on a monthly basis. The whole idea of only doing summer and winter updates feels very outdated, because often it's just the addition of new content, which if done badly, as they had done sometimes, it ends up being wasted content. But with more often rebalanced patches, we could reach a good stopping point in my opinion. Regardless, the next point is that the patch of the next week will come with some map reworks for the spawns of the quest line, which are what will probably make the biggest changes. So I understand that the current improvements with the patch of today seem underwhelming, and they are, but it's a bit early to call off as worthless, so let's wait one more week to decide. Moving on, the relocation of the teleports. This, although helpful, let's not deny that it is just a band-aid to a problem that perhaps they are unable to fix, which is the way creatures interact with the lack of players, and that allows the creation of these traps in the first place. That's what will be the ideal to fix, but I understand if it's harder to do so. So this is at least something, because it's true that at least for popular servers, people like to make these traps, especially in servers with a war active. But for some reason, they did this only to the entrances to the spawns, but forgot about the second floors, maybe because they are the ones getting reworked next week. But if not, I hope they fix this too. Next up is the increase of experience to the bosses. This is in line with the recent addition of bosses that are starting to give good experience, but it's not gonna do anything for these bosses in particular. First of all, these bosses are unique for whatever reason, they have a cooldown of 40 hours, so even if you wanted to farm them, they can only be done every 2 days. Additional to that is that most of them are not easy to access, so both of these are the main reasons stopping players from doing the bosses. Higher experience is not gonna change that, but also the experience bonus itself is not that meaningful. It sits at slightly less than Midman Vanguard, which is far more repeatable boss, but even for that one, people don't do it as much, because it also has the issue of having an annoying path to get to it. The ones that do are also aiming to get some of the rare drops from Midman, which are all decent equipment pieces with some real value, and that's not the case for Ferrumbre bosses. They all have one unique drop, but with no real use for them other than decoration, which does hold some value because of the rarity. And that rarity only comes from the fact that people just don't farm these bosses, so the supply of the items is quite low. Besides that, they don't drop anything else, and even the token drops is quite bad. At the start, when they got introduced, being one of the few sources of tokens made more sense, but nowadays they fall short even to bosses from the Great Danger questline, and that just makes no sense. So that's a lot of reasons that will stop players from doing these bosses more than once for the questline. But at least with the added experience, which should still be higher by the way, it gives the incentive for teams that decide to hunt in the spawns do the boss at the end of their hunt, giving a nice bonus to it. But for this to be a reality, their 2-day cooldown should be removed. It's an unnecessary thing to have. In Resume, make their cooldown match every other boss in the game for 20 hours, increase their common drops such as tokens and normal items, and then they will make more sense to consider doing. Next up is increased rate for the first floor of the Undead Seal and last floor of Booming Seal. The first one, Undead Seal, doesn't do anything, since the current layout doesn't have a lap that you could do without backtracking, at least on the first floor, but with the upcoming reworks of the layout, it might be meaningful then. For Booming Seal, it does help a lot. Back in the day when I hunted here, we often would have to do some bad pulls towards the right side of the floor near the teleport to deal with the overkilling, and we were not even high levels, so this is a well-received improvement, but at the same time, it's hard to say how much it changes the spawn. And now, what people were looking forward and possibly disappointed at, the monsters adjustments. Honestly, there is only 3 creatures that are worth discussing. Fury, Undead Dragons, and Hand of Course Fate. But for the sake of a better discussion, I will go through all of the changes, starting with Plaguesmiths. It really doesn't make much difference. 9% increase experience, which ends at 700 less than the original before the first nerf, is still bad. In a team hunt of level 500s, we were getting about 550 placements they are. Second place of kills to Grimlish at around 600 kills. That will add about 100k raw extra, which we were doing around the 4.5kk. So overall, a very tiny difference. I can see why both Grimlish and Bestclaws got ignored in these changes, as they are the main creatures of the spawns, but at the same time, without changing them, the improvements won't make a big difference. So for that reason, they should be more generous with the buffs on the less relevant monsters. Next up, the Furies. The reason I like this change is because it's outside of the norm of XP or loot. Their skill reduction, especially as EKs, is quite annoying to deal with, so it makes a big difference for knights, but at least for the spawns of Ferumbras it makes no difference. The Hellflyers got close to their previous XP, sitting at 800 less, which once again, they are not the main creatures of the spawns. So on a team of low 700s team hunting Juggernaut Seal, which has the most Hellflyers out of any other spawn, the kill distribution was sitting at around 270 base clouds, 300 Juggernauts, and 240 Hellflyers. So this change will only affect about 30% of the best spawn for it. And also both Hellflyers and Best Claws have their loot too nerfed at the moment, so until we see the change of the layout for the Juggernaut Seal, it's probably not enough to hunt yet. And speaking of Juggernaut Seal, the change of their HP only helps with the early hunts getting their charms, but after that it is a slight nerf, since charms will be doing less damage, so I don't know if it even makes a positive or negative change to the spawn. Hellfire Fighters again less experienced than their original numbers, aim for a creature that hardly has any meaningful density anywhere. Blightwalkers also doesn't change much anywhere, because in the Plague Seal of POI, they are already the creature with less HP, and in the Undead Seal of Ferumbras, it will only help to open up a space in the EK's box sooner and reduce the damage a tiny bit. Undead Dragons taking more ice damage is interesting. It will allow the druids to use waves or twin bursts on the pulse once the Blightwalkers die, making the pulse die faster. So that does have potential, but it remains to be seen what changes they do to the layout to decide if the spawn will be worth trying. It's worth noting that the Blightwalkers are still 50% resistant to ice, so switching to avalanches or ice weapon on the EK is still not the way to go. For the Phantasm, we don't even know what they mean by probability of summoning. It could be roughly the same or hardly any at all. Nightmares still giving less XP than their original number while not having a meaningful density anywhere in the game is still a terrible decision, especially when they are more difficult than a Dragon Lord, which was one of the main discussion points when the nerf was given to them the first time. And lastly, the Hand of Cursed Fate, the nemesis of EKs because of the high mana drain. Any change to their mana drain is highly welcome, but at the same time, without actual numbers, we don't know how meaningful it is. Additionally, them running a lower HP rather than a yellow could be considered a nerf if the mana drain is still bad, because often EKs will attack pools with hands on them to make them run away and then focus on the other creatures, so it's hard to say if it is a positive or a negative, but I think it's probably a good change, and I like that it doesn't involve simply XP or loot. With that said, that's all we got for now. Unfortunately, nothing was particularly exciting, but as I said at the start, I think the most impactful changes to these spawns will come in the form of map layout and density, and that will be coming next week, so until then, we won't know if this is a win or yet another disappointing rebalance. Thank you for watching, and special thanks to Tuna Hero, Nightstar, and Turtle Slasher.